Starting a business with a co-founder can feel like a dream until it doesn't.
Don't tell too soon. They are not your best friend. They might even see you as a threat.
Starting a business with a co-founder can feel like a dream until it doesn't. What do you do when the honeymoon phase is over and you decide to go part ways? It can be very tricky and a lot of feelings can be included as well. But how do we do it a legal and good way to make it good for both parts?
Yeah.
And that's why we have Kat here today, so we can ask her, how do we do? If a co-founder decided to, I want to exit, how do we proceed?
Well, the reason we're doing this episode is that we see that this is such an incredibly common problem. And many of us know that the mental health of founders is actually a challenge. And I know many founders who have had sleepless nights for years because they want out, but they feel the pressure. And they're in conflict with their co-founders. They brought on big investments. They've convinced people to come and work for them. They've been the spokesperson, but they know that they want out. They know that they do not want to continue. So what we'll help out with is a mapping. How should you act? How should you think before you make the leap? And our first recommendation will actually be, don't tell too soon.
Okay, and by that you mean?
I mean that if you have VC investors, they are not your best friend. They will have the interest of their investors top of mind. So if you come to them without having thought it through and just blurt out that you're planning to leave, worst case, they might even see you as a threat, afraid that you will start a competing business, go to a competitor. So our recommendation is to do the mapping we'll discuss now first and really think it through before you make the decision.
Okay, so you have a lot of responsibility as a co-founder and you don't want to just leave.
No, both for your own sake, just financially, reputation-wise, career-wise, and also for the startup, because hopefully you still want the best for that startup.
Yeah, of course.
And you might even stay on as an equity holder, a shareholder. So shall we get started?
Yes. How do we do?
Well, number one, let's review the financials. So number one will be to look at the shareholders agreement and any vesting agreement that you're under.
Okay.
And what you want to know is if you have unvested shares, that means that you might lose the shares if you depart. And then you want to know the terms. Do you have good and bad leaver clauses? That means that if you leave and go to a competitor, are you a bad leaver? Do you have to sell back the shares basically for free or at a discount to the fair market value, which is much better for you? So review the financial consequences. Do you get to keep your equity or do they have a right to buy your equity back? And if so, at what valuation?
Okay, so think through and think if you're ready to take the risk.
Yeah, and also see what the implications really are. I mean, imagine that if you stay on for another 4 months, you might have cliff vested half of your shares. So then it might be worth it to stick around yet some time. So analyze that first and foremost. And also something I see a mistake from some departing founders is that they think that they have a right to be bought out. And it's not a right. It's a right for the other founders and for the investors to buy you out if they want.
Okay.
So you cannot demand and say, I'm leaving, I want to sell all my shares at fair market value minus 20%. And I've seen founders nagging and trying to get bought out for years after they departed. But nobody has to buy your shares if they do not want to. Okay. Typically, I mean, you can have some other regulation, but 9 out of 10 cases, no. So remember, you will have to ask, you will have to negotiate.
Okay, so technically you can still be in the company even though you're not there.
Remain as an owner, and typically it's outside of your control if they decide to buy you out or not, at least partially.
Okay.
So number one, and we'll get back to all of the 5 steps in the end. But number one, check the financials, the consequences. Should you stay on for a while? What happens if you leave? Number two, look if you have other legal obligations, such as personal guarantees.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Often in the beginning of a startup's journey, you, the founders, will need to provide personal guarantees. It can be to the bank. It can be when you find the office you want. The landlord might say, well, I want you to sign personally also.
Okay.
So look that through, because of course the goal will be that if you depart, you will also be relieved of the personal guarantees if possible.
Okay, that sounds like very important to think of.
Extremely important. So you don't walk away and you don't even know or even remember how many personal guarantees you signed that first year when you were all on the honeymoon phase and you knew you were going to conquer the world. So review that, number 2 of this mapping.
Yes, and then number 3.
And number 3, that will be to look at your key man competence. What is it that you do for the startup? And how will it affect the startup if you leave? I mean, are you the head of innovation? Are you the technical guy that knows the actual innovation, the product, back and forward, and nobody else has that knowledge? Or are you the one responsible for all of the employees and so forth? So review that and review how you can make a handover. How can you help the startup to make sure that the competence does not leave with you? Instead, show that you thought it through and make sure that you can perhaps help find a replacement or help to just make sure that you train all of the other staff in whatever it is that is your knowledge and your expertise.
Okay, so you just don't leave with all the competence.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And again, we'll boil it all together. So that's number 3. Number 4, that will be reputation. The reputation for the startup and the reputation for you. So review what are the implications. Because if you are the CEO, you've been the spokesperson in all of the funding rounds, in external PR, when recruiting employees, then it will most likely be seen as a very negative signal if you leave. It can also be a negative signal for you that you did something wrong or that you're unreliable. Because last week you were preaching to the choir about how amazing the startup is, how everybody should invest, how everybody should leave their job and come and work for you, and then you go. So review that and think, can you also in this case make some kind of a smooth transition? If you are the CEO, perhaps you can come to a suggestion where you stay on the advisory board for 2 years. So you can, startups, you always need the storytelling. So in this case, write the story about why you're leaving. Perhaps the startup is simply in a different phase, and now somebody else needs to take the CEO role, and you will instead be on the advisory role for 2 years and still support the startup. That will make it easier for your reputation and for the startup, which means that the investors and the co-founders will most likely be less upset with you when you leave. And if they're less upset with you when you leave, they will probably be nicer to you in the financial negotiations about being bought out.
Okay, that's really, really good. So if we keep on going, what's the next step?
That's the last one.
Yes.
And the last one will be the non-compete and the non-solicitation that you most likely are subject to in your employment agreement and in your vesting agreement and in your shareholders agreement.
Okay, this sounds very crucial.
Yeah, because if you leave, most likely, say that you were in a startup about medtech. Well, then that is your expertise area. So you might want to start a new innovation, or you might want to go to big pharma, working with something within medtech. So review if you can, and if you have a non-compete, how broad is it, and for how long is it? And also remember that even if it's very broad and very long, it might be the case that in your jurisdiction, the employment protection will say that they're not allowed to enforce that as widely on you. So you have to review it carefully. And now we have all of the 5 steps.
Yes.
Yeah. And then make a case of it. So if you see that you have key competence and you can help the company by staying on and making a handover, if you see that you're important reputation-wise, make a plan, make suggestions like the advisory board. And if you see that you're under a non-compete that you really, really want to carve out for so you can move on doing something else that might not be competing but might be in the risk of falling under the non-compete, then you can negotiate that and say, I'll stay on, I'll help. And if you see that you have a really bad financial situation where they have a right to buy out your shares, or you know that they do not want to buy you out and you want to cash out, well, then you can come and offer them. Well, I really want to leave. I have a plan how we can make a smooth transition. I can help the company with X, Y, and Z. And I'm willing to stay on for a full year to make this happen. But then I want you to promise to actually buy me out on these terms, at least 50% of the equity. And I want you to do a carve-out for the non-compete because I want to do exactly this. And it will not compete with you, but right now I'm scared that you'll come after me. So I want us to make an exit agreement for me. So ask nicely, come prepared, and have the case ready. And then let them know.
So that's good. So be prepared is the first one. And also, when I hear you talk about this, to be transparent and honest in what you want and why you want to do it.
At the end.
At the end.
I'm actually saying don't be transparent in the beginning.
Not in the beginning, but
No.
I mean for the planning. Of course, it's good to have a plan when you want to negotiate with investors, because if you give them a solution, it's easier to negotiate.
Exactly.
And it might be better for you.
Much better. Because if you just say, I want out, you can end up in a very bad situation, and most likely people will be really mad with you. I mean, when you leave as a founder, you have to expect disappointment. But if you do it thought through and you show that you care about the company, most likely it will end up much better, and the anger will not be as fierce.
And you've probably seen a lot when you've been doing this. I mean, in your work, people might not be as planned as you're describing here. What can happen? I mean, what is the worst case?
I mean, the worst case is that you lock the door, it's conflict, you get a bad reputation. The signal for the company is something's wrong because you as a founder just picked up and left one day.
Yeah.
And the investors can be really mad. They might refuse to buy out when you want to be bought out. Or they might buy you out and you end up with basically zero, or as you feel, because you feel that you were when the company started struggling and you feel you were entitled to more than you got.
Oh, okay. So it can be bad both for your reputation and for your wallet.
Exactly.
So this is a really good steps to take. I mean, you described it very comprehensive, and we described the mapping process really good. I mean, if I was the founder who want to get out from the company, I would really, really use your tips and tricks. Could be very useful.
Hopefully, and also here on YouTube, there are many fantastic founders talking about founder conflicts, emotions, stress, and that can also be helpful to just hear that you're not alone. It is tough, and it's really tough to disappoint people. I mean, it's like telling somebody you want a divorce.
Yeah, it's like the same thing.
Yeah, it really is even worse.
Yes.
Because you have so many you're married to.
Yes, and you feel like the whole world is on your shoulders.
Yeah, everybody expects you to stick around.
So, I mean, if you're a co-founder and if you're thinking about exit your company, listen to this. I hope you got everything you need, because we are going to keep doing this and talk about business law to get all the tools you need to make good and mindful decisions. Like and subscribe so we can keep doing this, because you get knowledge at zero cost, and this is so crucial knowledge if you're having a business. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.